Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
This is one picture that you all know what it is when you see it. It's a familiar looking image, something probably we all have some personal experience with, right? This is a chest x-ray that would be taken in your doctor's office, for example, or a radiologist office. And it is a good example of biomedical engineering in that it takes a physical principle, that is how x-rays interact with the tissues of your body, and it uses that physical principle to develop a picture of what's inside your body, so to look inside and see things that you couldn't see without this device. You'll recognize some parts of the image. You can see the ribcage here, the bones, you can see the heart is the large bright object down here. If you have good eyesight from the distance, you can see the vessels leading out of the heart and into the lungs, and the lungs are darker spaces within the ribcage. Our civilization, which subsumes most of its predecessors, is a great ship steaming at speed into the future. It travels faster, further, and more laden than any before. We may not be able to foresee every reef and hazard, but by reading her compass bearing and headway, by understanding her design, her safety record, and the abilities of her crew, we can, I think, plot a wise course between the narrows and bergs looming ahead. I believe we must do this without delay, because there are too many shipwrecks behind us. The vessel we are now aboard is not merely the biggest of all time, it is also the only one left. The future of everything we have accomplished since our intelligence evolved will depend on the wisdom of our actions over the next few years. Creatures, humans have made their way in the world so far by trial and error. Unlike other creatures, we have a presence so colossal that error is a luxury we can no longer afford. The world has grown too small to forgive us any big mistakes. The library. We've all been to a historic library. We've all enjoyed the smell of a historic library. But what is it, and what does it mean? When at UCL Center for Sustainable Heritage, we've recently been asked to access the environment at another historical library at St. Paul's Cathedral, the Wren Library, an incredible place. It has such an intensive smell of old books. And we were also asked for the first time, really I was actually taken aback by the brief, we were asked, whatever you do please preserve the smell. It's so important to our audience. It is so important how people perceive the library. So that was quite an important message in our research. And indeed, the smell is an important way of how we communicate with the environment. This piece of research was done by an advertising company because advertisers are so interested in how we interact with each other in the environment. We see that the majority of people use sight obviously to interact with the environment, but on the second place, we see the smell is also very, very important. Here are 3 important factors in creativity: people, process and product. Most important one is the process. First, you have to create the right person through education with a creative mind. Second, you have to create the right process to have people engaged in innovation process. Third, you need to find the right problem to work on. Human beings can survive and prosper largely depending on the creativity they have. If you identify and assess the creativity of a finished product, it is taken as a proxy for the creativity of the person who produced such a product. Therefore, a creative product should be surprising, original, beautiful and useful. People should have factors necessary for genius, ability, and right mindset. And, so, a great public outcry, the London Authority sets up Public Carriage Office, which is an organization that still exists. But we can really thank the Great Exhibition of 1851 for giving us the world's premier taxi service, for it was going to this exhibition, and this fabulous exhibition invention from all around the 4 corners of the empire that the visitors were appalled, dismayed and vexed by their journeys to this exhibition because the cabbies of the day, and their horse-drawn carts were absolutely terrible, could not find their way to this exhibition. And you can take a short walk to Penton Street up the road, and this public carriage office took on the responsibility of licensing all major taxi drivers in London. All taxi drivers from 1851 onwards had to pass what is now known as the London Knowledge, was phenomenal knowledge of London. What is the London Knowledge? It's the ability to remember the 25,000 streets, have it all interconnected and all the main arterial roads in and out of London. Cabbies need to know all this plus 1,000 points of specific interest, cafes, bars, public offices. They need to know them all as part of their training. Take the coffee industry. The figures are roughly these. The coffee market in the world is worth about 60 billion. The growers get 5.5 billion. 10 years ago, the market was about 30 billion and the growers got a third of that. What has happened? What has happened is that well-meaning people, Americans, Germans, Europeans, decided that they would help Vietnam, and so they created a coffee industry there, which is now the second biggest producer in the world. This has serious effects on other countries like Colombia that depend on coffee exports. The birth rates increased during 20th century but it starts to decrease over these last 2 decades. In the year 2000, as an example, the birth rate remained at around 1.1% minus 1.2%. Birth rates dropped to its lowest point that has never been seen in the society. There are even some negative birth rates in other countries. The reason is that the Western countries' women are becoming more and more reluctant to give birth to babies, especially those young women under 30 years old. However, the male's status in society remains as strong as it ever has in recent years. It also has impacts on male in the society, especially young man, and it might have some connection with unemployment rates as well. In 1943, what became known as the Green Revolution began when Mexico, unable to feed its growing population, shouted for help. Within a few years, the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations founded the International Rice Research Institute in Asia, and by 1962, a new strain of rice called IR8 was feeding people all over the world. IR8 was the first really big modified crop to make a real impact on world hunger. In 1962 the technology did not yet exist to directly manipulate the genes of plants, and so IR8 was created by carefully crossing existing varieties, selecting the best from each generation, further modifying them, and finally finding the best. Here is the power of modified crops. IR8, with no fertilizer, straight out of the box, produced 5 times the yield of traditional rice varieties. In optimal conditions with nitrogen, it produced 10 times the yield of traditional varieties. By 1980, IR36 resisted pests and grew fast enough to allow 2 crops a year instead of just 1, doubling the yield. And by 1990, using more advanced genetic manipulation techniques, IR72 was outperforming even IR36. The Green Revolution saw worldwide crop yields explode from 1960 through 2000.
Audio Jungle.